Well, great to be here with you in one of the most exciting areas in the world today. I dare say every day you use something from SRI, whether it's the computer mouse, Windows, hypertext, electronic teleconferencing, Intuitive Surgical, which is a $27 billion company, Nuance, if you talk to a computer, that came from SRI, Siri on the iPhone, high definition television, it goes on and on. And I often get asked the question, we've been doing also tech companies, that's one of ours, Sisto, which is a banking interface with a natural language interface to be able to do basic banking really efficiently. And we've been working with major banks around the world on that. And people ask, well, how do you folks keep on creating billion-dollar businesses? You're only 2,500 people. How do you think about doing that? So I want to tell you a little bit about that. So in general, I think this is the best time ever. This certainly proves it. But I think we need to do a better job in innovation. There's a lot of confusion, I find, when I talk to groups about what innovation is. It's not creativity. It's not invention. What we do here is something different. It's the creation and delivery of new customer value in the marketplace with a sustainable business model. And most people forget the sustainable business model part. And I dare say more than half the companies in Silicon Valley go away because they don't have a business model. That upside-down ketchup bottle just illustrates a couple points. Generally, when you see something of significance, it's surprising. You go, oh, what's that? But then you adapt to it, and then if you don't have it, it's also surprising, but in a negative way. That's the world we live in. We create surprises, people adapt to it, goes away, we have to do it again. As you know, this is an interesting time. Exponential progress in most technological areas, intense competition, new business models, endless opportunities. You know, the traditional way of attacking companies is like what Tesla's doing. You attack from the top, and then eventually you lower the cost of the product to go after the main industry. But with Uber, obviously we're attacking industries from the side in ways where the incumbent industry can't even respond. The taxi industry is already gone, effectively, and they can't do a thing about it. And you folks are in a similar situation. You're attacking financial industries in ways where parts of them won't even be able to respond. They're just going to get wiped out. Makes it an interesting time. You know, it's not just this industry, it's almost every industry now is being transformed by technology. IT is playing a huge role across all of these different areas, but I've never seen more multi-billion-dollar opportunities in my life. How much waste is in the financial industry? Trillions, 10 trillion? It's huge, right? And what you guys are doing is basically saying every time there's a big point of waste, there's a business opportunity. We've got to get rid of that tens of trillions of dollars of waste. We did Siri on the iPhone. We spun that company out, and Steve Jobs bought it. But as you know, there are all kinds of now personal assistant. Everyone's building personal computer assistants. And the whole idea is to create a persona for you. So if your preferred interaction is with your puppy, someone's going to try and build that for you. It's going to be personalized to you. And these folks are trying to get on top of everything. They want to put it on top of every company you form. They want to put it on top of Google and Apple and everybody else. They want to control that interface to the customer. Whether they do it or not is something else. But there is a big battle going on here, which has a big impact on your industry as well. This chart shows the lifetime of the biggest companies in the world. The ups and downs show business cycles about how fast they go away before they're bought or sold. The interesting thing about this chart is that the lifetime of the biggest companies now is down to under 15 years. I just read a report, says it's 10 years. Most big companies are having a terrible time adapting fast enough because they can't change their business model. It's been optimized over decades to the new realities of what you're confronting. We all know Kodak took them 10 years to go from #1 to out of business. Motorola got rid of the heart and soul of the company, bought by Google, and then they sold it to a Chinese company. And Nokia is kind of the poster child for what not to do. They went from #1 to out of business in just 7 years. And they had great people, great technology, great everything. But they didn't innovate. Innovation is a mystery to most. Here's a quote I like. Every leader at least give lip service to the idea that the world is moving faster, we need to do a better job at innovation. But if you go into that enterprise and ask people to describe their innovation system, you get blank looks. They have none. That's my test. When I walk into a company, I ask a middle-level manager, what's your innovation process? And if I get a blank look, they don't have one. And if they don't have one in a world that moves as fast as this one, I get worried. Or I write them off. They're not going to make it. How about the venture community? The red bars here show the top 25% of companies, venture companies. They do quite well. The last decade or so, they have not done so well. They're doing better right now. What's interesting, though, is the bottom quartile, which is the line that goes along the bottom. It turns out, even here in Silicon Valley, most VCs don't make money. And the top 5% make all the money. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Do you know Vinod Koshal? Everybody here know Vinod, one of the most famous VCs in the Valley? 90% of VCs really add no value, and I truly believe 70% of them reduce the performance potential of a company. Vinod Koshal. 70% reduce the potential of a company. So we've worked with a lot of VCs, and I think you have to be really careful to get the right partner when you form your venture. The best ones know the best people, they know the best entrepreneurs, they know the best partners, they know what the criteria are, and so I'd recommend you really work hard to get great VCs. I've done workshops with companies and incubators and thousands of senior executives. And here's what we found. We asked them to bring in their most important projects, and we worked with them for 2 or 2.5 days. And you know this product development curve. And most of them have no value proposition. In fact, out of those most important projects, we typically find that only less than 20% of them have any real value for the company. We don't decide that. We just give them the way to think about that. They decide that. Less than 20%. And what's missing is no value proposition. When you listen to the pitch, it just doesn't make sense. The critical questions are not answered. There are many bad ideas. You probably heard this one, fail fast to succeed early. I think that's one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard because it doesn't tell you what to do. The goal in innovation is to learn fast, to learn and create fast, not to fail fast. Sure, you're going to go ups and downs and have bumps and grinds, but it's all about learning. If you're learning in the right way, your VCs will stay with you and live with you. I wrote a book about this. I'm not going to talk about that. It was a top 10 book when it came out. So what are some of the fundamentals? Well, it has to be an important opportunity in the white space. I'll say more about that. It has to have a defensible value proposition, a pain-killing solution 2 to 10 times better. You need a beachhead market where you can start, where your product doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be scalable in some way. It has to have a network effect or some other way so you're not doing hand-to-hand battle winning each one of your customers. Best team and partners, we just talked about that. Timing. At SRI, we almost never failed because we were of the technology. We almost always failed because we got the timing right in the beginning. And we were almost always too early because we'd been working on, like the Internet of Things. We worked on that for 20 years before it became a real thing. So our team was always anxious to go out too soon. And one of the big lessons was timing is more important than just about anything else. If you catch that wave when it's going up, you can make all kinds of mistakes and you'll still survive. If the wave hasn't started to break, it's a slog. And if the wave is starting to go down after like the bubble, it's another slog. You got to get it the timing right. I think that's where most of the ventures I actually see fail. That and teamwork. And you need to understand how to create value because, as you know, when you start whatever you're doing, as soon as you hit the market, you're probably going to have to pivot and change and modify your product because in the beginning you just don't know enough. So you want to have a demo, prototype. You want to have a go-to-market plan. You want to have milestone-based financing. It's all kind of basic stuff. And at least risk awareness and how you might address the issue if it shows up to be real. So when we think about value creation, it's a process of doing R&D or collecting knowledge. It doesn't have to be R&D. Addressing an important need. And connecting those two is a process. So anything you can do to make that go faster, coming to this meeting is a way to make it go faster. That's good news. Anything that slows it down is terrible. You hope to create a sustainable product for a while, and then, of course, you have to start over. So that first part is called value creation, and when you get it into the marketplace, it's called innovation. I wonder how many of you have a definition for what customer value is. If you ask your team, you might want to ask them when you go home, what's the definition of customer value? Everybody here have a definition? Probably not. Most teams don't. It's benefits over costs. And the reason you want to have something like this simple little concept is you want to be able to think of all the benefits and all the costs or how you can mitigate the costs to create the maximum value for your customer. And benefits and costs are only perceived by our customers. What we think doesn't matter. It's what they think that matters. What's the definition of a value proposition? Probably the most important definition in business. Again, I've never met a team that had a consistent definition for a value proposition. Not that smart people don't figure it out, they do. It just slows them down. So at SRI, we use this one. What's the important customer and market need? What's the unique and compelling approach with a business model? What are the benefits per cost or the value from that particular approach? And is it 2 or 10 times better than the competition or the alternatives? Every presentation at SRI started with those 4 questions. You can't take one of those questions away and have a value proposition. Try it. Take one of those questions away. And all of a sudden, you realize you cannot communicate effectively with your teammates. If you take one thing away from the talk, this is it, right here. This is the most common failure. I've listened to thousands of presentations, and almost all of them are about the person's idea or approach or technology. Almost all of them. And typical pitch will be, there's this really big need in fintech. I want to tell you about my approach. You got 2 or 3 hours? I'm going to tell you about my approach. The benefits are obvious, and there's no competition. And every time I hear one of those, I think, I already know of 5 other companies that sound like they're doing exactly the same thing. How can this be, right? And what about China? We think we're isolated. We're not. Go to Beijing University or Tsinghua University in an industrial park, and you'll be sitting there with hundreds and hundreds of brilliant Chinese who are basically working on the same stuff we're working on here in Silicon Valley. It's a really competitive world. And unfortunately, 95% of the presentations I hear around the world look like this. We call them big A's. They're all about the person's idea, but they're not about the value proposition that would really change the world. So we use this because it's the starting point for every venture. Focuses everyone on creating value, starts out with the customer. How important is that? Applies to every position, simple, effective. It's a very kind of basic idea, but I would tell you it's potentially transformative if you use it throughout your company. How do we find these billion-dollar opportunities one after the other? Well, first off, we think a lot about markets and customers and what we can do. We can't do everything, and what the competition is doing. And you look at these different numbered boxes and you say, well, where do you want to be? Well, 1, 2, and 3 are not good places to be, right? You don't want to be where your competition is already strong. You want to be up there where you can do something and you have the capability, where your customers want you to do something and you can have the capabilities to do it. So that's called the white space, right? And then the beachhead is the piece of that where you can get started with your company. People often ask, well, how could Steve Jobs find all these opportunities? Well, he had a very comprehensive way to think about value. So there's, in this case, is perceptual quality. You'll get what I mean in convenience. So AM radio, FM radio, black and white TV, color TV, HD TV. My team set the US standard for that. I thought it would last for a while. 7 years later, we have 4K. It's gone already. And it'll keep on going. It'll keep on going. And a lot of Japanese companies think that way. Morita-san at Sony thought about convenience. And he did the Walkman and the first transistor radio. And then we had PDAs, and then the iPod, and then the iPhone, and the iPad, and blah, blah, blah. How many billion-dollar opportunities do you think are still left just on these two dimensions? Is it 1, 10, hundreds? Who knows? It's a huge number. Now look at the space that you're in. Performance and efficiency, you have the same thing. You have convenience, easy of use, privacy, security, trust. These are all huge issues in the fintech business. How many companies are in this space with problems that just drive people nuts in terms of the lack of convenience, the lack of control, the lack of privacy? It's got to be tens and tens of thousands of new at least $100 million, if not billion companies. And you know, this space now is being populated. And just Bitcoin, the thought of Bitcoin, how many companies will that by itself create? Thousands, undoubtedly. Who knows? I mean, it'll be everywhere, right? So the opportunities in this space are among the biggest I have ever seen in my life. The other thing we look at is what we call colliding exponentials. The beautiful thing about the time we're in is that almost all technologies that matter to us are growing exponentially. So Moore's law, everybody knows about. But it's not just one. The world you're in is networking, cloud, AI, big data, analytics. There's about probably 15 technologies that impact this field. And they're all growing exponentially. And what does that mean? That means that every 5 or 10 years, there's a factor of 10 or 1,000 improvement in that technology. And what that means is, all of a sudden, there are opportunities to do things that were impossible 5 years ago. I'll give you an example in a minute. So this field is just beginning. I mentioned the Siri kind of interface. It's going to be ubiquitous through essentially all of these products. It's going to transform how people interact with all of your services. Of course, I'm not going to dwell on this, but customer interaction is fundamental to this because a lot of what you're capturing is the customer experience. How do you make it easier, friendlier, more comprehensible? I'll end with, when we're at SOI, when we think about these things, we identify white spaces and then we say, what's the key thing, if we could solve that one or two key things, can we open up that market? Not 100 things, a few key things that if we could figure it out, it would open it up and transform that white space. And both for the solution and for the business model. So this isn't a tech example, but it's one that I like because it makes the point. That girl has MS. In fact, there are tens, if not hundreds of millions of people who have mobility problems. It's a huge, multi-billion-dollar opportunity. And here's what they built in Japan. They basically were building robots. So they basically said, oh, we'll strap a robot onto a human being, and that'll help them move around. Do you think that's something that that child would want to wear? Or how about an 80-year-old who's got a mobility problem? Weighs 35 pounds, it only lasts 2 hours, and when you walk in it, you feel like you really are a robot. And our team said, that's not going to work, that's not a solution. But we still have to attach the robot somehow to the body. How about a Chinese puzzle? You put your fingers in, it grabs. If you push them in a little bit the right way, you can pull it out. Why can't we put a Chinese puzzle on each leg? And we can have sensors. You step forward, it grabs. Move the other leg, this one ungrabs. Whoops. What did I do? Whoops. Can you get me back to where I'm supposed to be? It grabs. And so it's grab, 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 and you can walk along. I want to show you the picture of that. Good, thank you. Okay, that was the first prototype. It's a pair of pants that you put on. The power lasts for 10 hours. You can wear it all day, it's comfortable. And we're now building slick versions of that will be kind of designer pants for mobility. But the point I want to make here is the key insight was saying, how do we attach this to the body? And we didn't invest any money until we had that key insight. And as soon as we had that, we spent a little bit of money, built a prototype, and now we're on the path to creating still another multi-billion-dollar business. At SRI, we use what we call value creation forums. I'm not going to dwell on this, but basically everybody at SRI, including Kurt, had to stand up every 2 to 4 weeks and present the value proposition on what they're doing. Everybody. Why? Because you're not smart enough. You're just not. You don't see your own flaws. You don't see the mistakes you're making. So people would give short 5 to 10 minute pitches on their value proposition, and then people would say what was good and what needs to be improved, and you couldn't argue back. If you were arguing back, you weren't listening, you weren't learning. A buddy would take notes. And we did that for everything. And I would tell you, if you sat through these meetings 5 or 6 times, you'd be amazed at how fast people improved. This continuous learning cycle of having to stand up in front of your colleagues on a regular basis and present your value proposition. It is incredibly powerful, and I can't tell you how few companies that I've worked in even would think of doing something like that. Even though they all admit it makes perfect sense. The best incubators do a version of that, right? But in most companies, the answer is no. So I will end with this example. So here's Siri. So we had a big research project. We could actually build Siri 3 years before we spun the company out. We had the technology. What we didn't have was a business model. So at a low level, without spending much money, we tried out various value propositions to create both a product and a viable business model. What was the business model, the product in the beginning? The product in the beginning was, it was impossible to get down to most of the services on the web because every time you did a click, you lost 30% of your potential audience. So the concept for the product was, you ask it for it, it goes right to the whatever you want. And it was focused on us. It was focused on business folks. The business model had to do with getting reference fees from people we would send you to, and the APIs didn't exist. Enough of them didn't exist. So we spent 2 years incubating a product that we had with no business model. We finally figured out the APIs look like they're going to come in time. We then went and hired what we considered to be the absolute best team who were experts in that particular business model. We incubated it in SRI still for another year to take the risk out of it before we spun the company out. 3 months later, Steve Jobs comes and he personally negotiates the deal with us. He didn't send the vice president. Steve Jobs showed up. He was calling our CEO 3 to 5 times a day. How many CEOs today would do that? We called up every other big name company you can think of, and they didn't even know what we had done. He was doing his homework all the time. He was doing the kinds of things I just talked about. Aggressive learning to figure out the exponentials, the trends, the different dimensions of value. He was the ultimate exemplar of this way of creating ventures. I'll skip this chart. So I want to end with, it's the best time ever. God bless you all. You're in one of the most exciting areas the world has ever seen. But I say, mostly what I see is pretty poor performance because people don't stick to the fundamentals. So my hope for you is go after things that really matter. Be really demanding about your value proposition. Best team and partners. Get the timing right. Use value creation best practices. I gave you a couple examples today. And if you do that, like we discovered at SRI, the chance of success is really, really high. Thank you.